So I'm Tom Wild, the CEO of Indico Data, and we've developed a solution for intelligent intake to help with the intake process around property casualty, life, and health. Naveen?
I'm Naveen Dhar. I'm part of the Microsoft team. I'm a director, insurance worldwide. I work with partners and customers, especially help insurance companies meet their transformation needs.
So if you sat through the previous session, you heard about, this dovetails kind of nicely, you heard about all the incredible things you can do when you have a complete data set on the customer or the prospect that you're working with. AI and machine learning has made it possible to do incredible predictive things when you have a nice complete data set. This dovetails nicely because we're going to talk about what if you don't have that? How do you get that? And specifically in very complex use cases like property casualty, where you're getting large bundles of content that doesn't start life in a structured format. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. So Naveen, what are some of the challenges that exist today? You know, why are carriers faced with this? What are they trying to accomplish in this space?
Tom, good question. I'm going to elaborate that through a few scenarios, but let me say at a very high level, in the property casualty, the reinsurance side, the commercial side, and the specialty lines, a lot of application submissions comes through brokers. And there's so many applications coming through, and I'll talk through each scenario, and some of the conversations we're having with carriers is, so I talked to a reinsurance carrier which said, I'm getting so many applications in there, and I have the capacity of underwriters only to do 70% of them. But I don't know if the 70% I picked up will gain me the maximum revenue for my company. Should I have prioritized some other submissions that came through, right? And so they are looking at this and saying, can I build something that could help me? It may not underwrite for me, but it can at least go through all my documentations, all my submissions, and help me prioritize which ones my underwriter should work for. I talked to a commercial carrier and they said, well, I have a different challenge. I'm getting so many submissions for quotes. I am not able to give them all a quote. And I don't know how do I get to a point where I can get everybody a quote, and then only on the ones that have traction, then I would have my underwriters work on that. So similar challenge, can I now use all the documents coming in the submission bundle that I can use, and I can go back with the quote that they can work, right? Same story on the cyber side, right? You can have this where you have a lot of these coming in, but how do you prioritize those applications that the underwriters should work on? I think that's the key thing out there, and that's where there's a growth for both revenue and trying to minimize and maximize the effectiveness of the underwriter and what is it they're working on.
So what's been the big challenge? Why haven't they been able to solve this historically? You know, and what's starting to change here? Obviously, Microsoft has a strong presence here, and the incredible success with OpenAI. So why haven't they solved it before, and what's starting to change? Do you think?
So this is something a lot of carriers and everybody has been working on, right? So if you look at the ACORD forms, the ACORD forms change based on state and jurisdiction you're on. If you look at all of the documents that come in, you have documents that are completely, there are structured documents, and then you go all the way over where they have handwritten documents coming in. I could have a submission coming in where some of the material could be handwritten by a doctor, right? So it's a lot of stuff that is coming in. The challenge has been, in the old days, traditionally when it was built on a dictionary where they were looking for specific things, or it was built on positions where they could go back, get the data, and start working on it. But the challenge with this, everything that was built was really brittle, right? Because you have a form and the form changes, and then the IT had to go in and do a lot of work to make it change, and the business was not satisfied, and this became a nightmare for the number of people trying to manage it, build it. And so there's always the context about how can we make it easier, better? How can we use something? And the large language models that have come in now are making a great impact out here. They do excellent work working with all the text that is out there. And so how do I get the data out, make maintenance cheaper, easier, and yet get a context out of it? And I think that's driving the change that's out there.
When you talk to customers about generative AI and large language models, what are some of where's the excitement that you're hearing when you sit down with them? Because obviously, incredibly part of the Microsoft story now.
I think the biggest piece out there is, the thing that people have been pitching to them is either saying, well, automate the whole submission process, but I think that's not where they are. I think what they are saying is, I have some legal risk. I'm not going to automate everything. But what I want to do is prioritize it. So I think that's a great. Eventually, yes, we'll get to a point where we'll automate the whole thing. But how do I even get to a point where I can take it, prioritize, and get immediate revenue gains today? I think that's where the excitement is. So can I leverage what I have? Because think of it, I get submissions today, and the date may be wrong, but rest of the address is right. Do I really need a human to go and correct it? Can I get it done automatically through AI? If I have a submission coming through, and I'm switching over to a different side of the claims, but a similar topic, where I could have somebody writing something that is incoherent and could be fraudulent, right? So the interesting thing for all insurers really is that they can now leverage a lot of these large language models to do things they couldn't do before, identify things earlier in the process, and thereby make their folks more productive and get better things done.
So huge excitement. Yep. Where's some of the anxiety that you hear from customers when they start to think about deploying these technologies at scale?
So some of the things that they're worried about, I think I will talk about, is traceability, right? If I'm going to go through and read the documents, and especially if I get to a point where I say I want to have no human in the loop, right? I think there's always going to be human in the loop here.
Straight through processing.
Straight through processing. Yeah. It's like, how do I do auditability? How do I go back and say, you use these fields to do the analysis? Where did you get the fields from? Which document did they come from? Or vice versa. How do I know I have not missed a key element that was there in the document? And it's great that the documents and the prompts you use to actually do the analysis, you can trace back. But how do I know I did not miss something, right? So I think those are the key things that they're struggling with, the legal aspect of it. But I think those are the key ones where they are, which actually brings me back to maybe, how do you see that? Because from your perspective as Indigo, you guys have been working with a lot of customers, and you have solved these things with them. So I'm kind of interested in what are your experience? How are you seeing customers actually solve these things?
Yeah, I think building on your point about the anxiety, we like to talk about the 3 S's: safe, secure, scalable, because I think that there's, even kind of reflecting on the previous session, there's a bit of a risk here that a lot of these turn into black box decisions, and that gives people a lot of anxiety, and especially gives the regulators a lot of anxiety. So when you break that down, safe meaning trustworthy and explainable. So how has this decision been rendered? And traceability. Can I work backwards to find the sort of core elements of how that decision was arrived at, even though could be complex machine learning? And I think that's one of the challenges of generative AI is it's not trivial to make it explainable, or at least footnoted as to where did you find this information. So that's a key. I think secure is I'm talking bits and bytes, right? So that is really sort of the challenge there that we hear from customers is, I don't want my data to be used to enhance someone else's solution, right? So how do I ensure that my data doesn't escape into the wild, especially if you're talking about PII and HIPAA and things like that. And then scalable, I think as you think about Gen AI and applying it to solve some of these problems like intake, doing the math to really figure out how to make it cost effective. There's multiple techniques, generative AI, discriminative AI, and they have different cost profiles. So making sure you're using the right technology for the right challenge, and doing both the math on the cost of it, and the safety and secure nature of it is really important.
It's interesting. I think just to elaborate a little bit more, when you talk about the traceability aspect of it, the legal aspect, what has your experience been? How easy has it been working with insurers to get that piece worked out?
Yeah, I think it's become table stakes. So I think the internal compliance and governance folks are now saying, okay, you're going to use some kind of model to make a decision. We need to understand how that decision gets made and be able to trace back in time and be able to audit that. So when you start thinking about things like generative AI, where the way I like to describe Gen AI is it's really, for me, more than anything, it's a new programming language. I think that's a good metaphor for it, right? It's sort of like, imagine that we all went to sleep and woke up tomorrow and we all knew Java, right? It's kind of that equivalency. So imagine that every employee at your company now is a software programmer, because essentially that's what Gen AI allows them to do. And how do they program that software? Well, they program it with prompts, right? Natural language. I just ask it questions and it gives me answers. Well, that's really powerful, but the same analogy applies. If everyone knew Java tomorrow, you wouldn't let everyone push code into production, right? That would be insane. You wouldn't have 25,000 people just randomly pushing code into production. So thinking about how to put guardrails around using Gen AI who can create prompts? What prompt was used at what time to generate what response? Who can edit those prompts? All these things start to come into play when you think about applying this very powerful technology to solving things like document intake, data intake, and so forth.
And is there benefits that you see insurers trying to work through this that is coming out, and how do you tie that back to their investments into this whole thing?
I had a really interesting conversation just a couple hours ago that was right on point with this. And the way we describe it is, as an industry, we're moving from the data era and into the decision era. I don't have to convince anybody in the audience that you should have a data strategy, that you should know where to get your data, where to store your data, how to audit your data. We're 10 or 20 years into that, right? So everyone has a strong data strategy. In every industry, by the way. Insurance just happens to be an industry that literally runs on data. As we enter the decision era, that is really where, as a carrier, your intellectual property comes from. Your ability to make decisions better and faster than the competition is where the new competitive landscape is. And so, again, reflecting on all the things you can do when you have a complete set of data to make those decisions. When we talk to carriers about the intake challenge, which is typically, especially in commercial lines, if you think about it, you start with an email inbox, right? I like to joke that email is still the ultimate API, right? It's the most widely adopted API there is. People send you this collection of attachments as PDFs. The email itself is valuable. That begins the process, right? That begins an underwriting process. It may begin an FNOL. So you have this real challenge because I've got an unstructured email. I have N number of documents. Inside those documents is N number of data points that I need to be able to drive increasingly the investments I've made in these intelligent decision platforms. But those decision platforms all make a huge assumption that you're going to feed them correct, structured, schematic data so they can make those decisions. So I think that's often overlooked as an important part of this equation.
So taking further, right, given the benefits, how do you see companies actually trying to make this enterprise grade, right? What would it require? What would require them to actually make this enterprise wide, make it enterprise grade, make it hum and like how?
Yeah, I think that in addition to Gen AI, we certainly have an opinion that making the technology accessible by sort of consumerizing the experience so that line of business people can be successful with it. I think IT has shifted their perspective over the last 10 years. I think initially IT was irritated by low code, no code, and sort of pushing back and wary of it. Then they realized, well, actually it allows us to unblock, the IT bottleneck that everyone would be so frustrated with, right? Like, oh, IT never gets anything done for me. So now there's this nice balance that you can achieve, which is IT is still responsible for InfoSec, deployment, scalability, environment, right? And then they should be, because that's a corporate requirement. You can't have, every small business unit standing up their own cloud instances and doing that with any kind of governance framework. But once you have that framework established, these technologies allow you to distribute these capabilities out into the organization while still knowing you have a governance framework to do that. And I think the second is really thinking about the cost profile. So right now we're back in the phase, this happened 5 years ago, where you had VPs of AI that started to appear in these companies, which I was always a little puzzled by. Like you don't have a VP of Java or a VP of Python, right? So that was kind of a bit of a strange construct. It was temporary. Then it went away and kind of AI got infused into business. We're seeing it again with Gen AI. So we'll have a lot of conversations with folks who say, well, I want to use Gen AI. And my response is always, well, wait a minute. Yep. Like, start with the outcome.
Yep.
And let's work backwards. Maybe Gen AI is right. Maybe AI is right. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's another approach. So we're kind of in that right now where you have everyone's running around with this like golden hammer, which is Gen AI, and they're like, where's the nail? I want to hit something. And it's like, okay, slow down. Like, are we building a house? Are we building a shed? Like, what are we doing? So I think that's an important consideration right now. It still doesn't change the fact that you need to start with a business outcome. What is going to be valuable as an outcome? And make sure that the approach you're taking, whatever it is, machine learning, Gen AI, et cetera, is cost effective and is going to be viable for that problem. In terms of Microsoft, talk a little bit, if you could, about, Microsoft is historically a massive kind of horizontal technology play, and that's still very much how you develop your products. You guys have a very strong presence here. Talk a little bit about how does Microsoft help insurers think through this vast array of technologies available with Microsoft and elsewhere to make them successful?
So as we work through with companies, right, especially with all the different technologies you have, LLM, the Azure OpenAI has been the latest shining star that everybody has been talking about. Every conversation these days is about OpenAI. I think the key here is that there's a lot of focus on where we can go to productivity, right? The co-pilots, whether it is co-pilots being built from a Microsoft perspective, if we've got co-pilots, and I think what we're really talking about is an underwriter co-pilot, if I had to use a term, basically helping the underwriter become more productive. Similar to that we have a co-pilot for every other role we can think of, because that's where we have our customers who can build their own co-pilot. They can use their own data and their own processes to build their co-pilot. This is in addition to the co-pilots that Microsoft has across their products. But I think the key for us, as we have been talking to different customers, has been about the build versus buy conversation, right? Because you have the where you would have to build your solution. There are Microsoft building blocks which can help them actually build their solutions. And then you have the piece where we could have a partner like Indigo, where you have a pre-built solution leveraging Microsoft technology, which has all the experience that they've gained by working with other customers, and that's been inbuilt, right? Similar to that. So I think that's the key conversation that I've been seeing a lot of our carriers have been talking about. And I think that's the discussion we have to say is, what are the pros and cons, what does it help, and where do you see these co-pilots going, and what the future is, right? I think that's been the key conversation that has been helping on this journey from a Microsoft perspective.
Why is co-pilot the right metaphor? Talk about that some more, because obviously from the from Satya on down, like co-pilot is the metaphor that Microsoft has established around Gen AI. So what's the genesis of that? Why is that the metaphor instead of a robot?
I'll talk it from my perspective. For me, the term co-pilot, if I have a pilot, the pilot is driving the plane, right? And if I was to completely automate it and substitute the pilot, then it would be autopilot. But when you have something helping the existing pilot and assisting him, I think that's the term co-pilot. At least that's my version of how I think about it, right? And so the idea is, as we are walking through this and we are specifically talking about the underwriting co-pilot, it's an assistant to the underwriter, not a replacement for the underwriter. And I think that's the key here. And I think that's why the term co-pilot is what I really like so much.
Yep.
And I think Satya maybe coined it, or somebody in Microsoft coined it. But it just is so appropriate and so apt to describe what we're trying to do. And then getting that submission process through that co-pilot and getting those benefits is the key, I think. And then that's where the term is apt and makes sense with all the new product enhancements that we have in place.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear over and over again from folks is, you made the point early on that one of the big challenges is that carriers cannot get at the full river of submissions, right? It's sort of a, last in, first out, and whether that's the right order or not, that's all they can do. And it's, if they could hire 10 times more underwriters, they would have already done it, right? Because the math would have worked. And so the reality is, especially we're in a tight labor market, that's just not feasible. So the theme I hear over and over again is how to create, co-pilot, or I often describe it as, how do I give my underwriters or claims adjudicators a bionic arm, right? So they can lift 100 pounds, but tomorrow if they can lift 1,000 pounds, that's great, because I have this unlimited stuff that needs to be, put on the shelf. And that's definitely something that I hear, is that even if they could hire more people, that's not the right answer here. And the tight labor market means these are specialized roles, and they just cannot be solved just by throwing people at it.
I think very well said. I think the key is prioritization, productivity, revenue growth, and building the co-pilot for underwriter and helping out.
Yeah, ingest more of that river of intake, but do it in an intelligent way, where you're picking the right risks, or making sure that the right claims are adjudicated at the right time, without fraud, et cetera. With underwriting, can I find that right risk? Do I have a complete data set to take advantage of this incredible world of decisioning that is unfolding now? if you can put your hands on a complete data set for those decisions.
Very well said.
Good. Well, appreciate the time here. This was a quick fireside chat. And if you have questions, we're happy to chat with you after the panel here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.